Good morning again. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Bonnie Basham, President of FNPS Board of Directors. It gives me a very great pleasure to introduce Jeff Castor. He is a gardener, conservationist, and landscape architect. Jeff is also the president of the Board of Directors of the Florida Wildflower Foundation. FWF and FNPS continue to work closely together to spread the word about how and why to use Florida native plants. Our two organizations have shared many interests and goals, and I want to thank Jeff, Stacy, and the board of FWF for continuing to strengthen that partnership. It is really great to work with such enthusiastic partners. Jeff, thanks for being with us today.
Good morning, native plant enthusiasts and experts. The idea for this morning's panel grew from the Foundation's desire to honor Carolyn Shagg, Nancy Bissett, and Ann McKay, three native wildflower advocates and activists. Before most of us were aware that native plants mattered, Carolyn, Ann, and Nancy were outspoken on behalf of pitcher plants, blazing star, Coreopsis, milkweed, and more. We wanted to honor them in a significant way. After all, they've already received countless other awards and honors, including the Foundation's highest honor, the Elizabeth Pate Coreopsis Award. It may be unmeasurable, but certainly it's been meaningful that these three women donated so many hours, evenings, and weekends, conserving, protecting, restoring, organizing, teaching, meeting, and mentoring, away from their families and careers. Now, in honor of Carolyn, Nancy, and Ann, we have an opportunity to give them a few minutes of our attention and to give a gift to the next generation of conservationists. Florida Native Plant Society hopes to raise $15,000 for internships for young conservationists and scientists. The foundation has already started the fundraising with a $5,000 donation. In addition, all other donations up to a total of $5,000 made by the end of June will be matched by the foundation. For any donations made by the end of the conference, the foundation's match will be doubled. Here is a way to honor Carolyn, Nancy, and Ann in a way that benefits our collective future. Please enjoy getting to know the honorees and help out if you can. Thank you.
This question is for all three of you. Tell us how you got interested in conservation and native plants and wildflowers. Was there a childhood experience that started it all? Was there someone or something that inspired you or fostered that interest and enthusiasm? Nancy, let's start with you.
Whenever I'm asked this question, I always have the same answer. It starts when you're a kid. So remember that, parents, etc., teachers. I grew up out in the country in a pastor's home. My dad was a pastor with the church next door, and a huge yard, humongous garden that we helped plant and harvest from, and lots of playtime to build leaf houses, collect hickory nuts, all these things that put you in touch with plants. And it was a special time for me, those 7 years.
Thank you. Carolyn, what about you? What in your childhood brought you to the world of conservation and native plants and wildflowers?
I was born in a farmhouse. My family of 9 lived off the land. My mother planted a large vegetable garden each summer, but always left room for lots and lots of flowers. As a child, I studied soil erosion in grade school, and in high school entered and won essay contests on conservation of natural resources. At age 10, I joined a small 4-H club started by Ida, an elderly lady in our local community. Ida encouraged me to enter competition in flower arrangement, baking, and sewing, and I won each year and represented my county at the state fair. I was named the most outstanding female 4-H member in Washington County at the age of 13 and received a week stay at the 4-H camp. Mary, a young lady at the county extension office, took me to the state fair those 3 years and to camp. The final night of camp, all circled in the darkness and lit candles and sang, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." This became my personal goal for my life. These 3 ladies, my mother, Ida, and Mary, inspired me to become a leader and encourage youth to protect the earth.
What inspired you, Anne? Were you always interested in gardening and being in nature?
I was always interested in being in nature. I had a horse and we lived in the country, and I did a lot of riding, and we camped every summer with our boys, and that was important to each one of them and ultimately to me. I came on board pretty late in the conservation movement, but I think I didn't know what one was, but I was. And my mom and dad, I don't know, my family was involved in growing things. Like my aunt was in the 40s and 50s, was a nationally known daylily hybridizer. And my dad grew camellias. Of course, both of those are not natives. So natives, I've come to appreciate a little later in life. And I'm so enthusiastic about the natives, but I didn't know about it then. But I think all of that sums up kind of I had a wonderful life, but spent an awful lot of time outside, just enjoying nature. And I want to preserve it.
Anne, as wife of Governor Buddy McKay, you had the opportunity to meet Lady Bird Johnson, who was not only an advocate for native plants, but very influential in getting the Highway Beautification Act passed and bringing attention to roadside wildflowers. What was that experience like? And were you influenced by her, by that meeting?
Yes, I was influenced by her. I mean, I remember the legislation in the 70s, and I wasn't really involved at that point, but thought, what a wonderful idea. But I think it was 99, 98, 99, Lady Bird Johnson invited the first ladies from the Southeast to meet at Callaway Gardens to encourage southern states to plant more wildflowers on right-of-ways. It was sort of the second phase of the original legislation. That legislation, of course, dedicated a portion of the costs of the interstates and other highways to wildflowers. And she was an impressive lady and spent time with us. I think Gary Henry and I and Jeff Norsini, that I can remember, we went together to see the Wildflower Center that she created. And we always sort of thought maybe we would put a center in Florida. And as we looked at it over the years, and they did too, the way we're operating is probably the better way than having one place, just because Florida is really made up of 2 or 3 geographical areas that you'd have to be tuned into. So she was quite a force at that time, and an influence to me as well.
Carolyn, you've been an active member of the Florida Federation of Garden Clubs for over 60 years. Tell us about your involvement with them and their role in conservation and advocating for native wildflowers and plants.
Yes, I joined my first garden club 60 years ago. And in 1969, my family moved to Florida, and I joined a local garden club, which made me a member of the Florida Federation of Garden Clubs. And we abbreviate that to FFGC. They will celebrate 100 years in 2024 and are planning a huge celebration. Over the years, I have completed the National Garden Club schools in environmental, gardening, landscaping, and flower show school. I have served in office at the circle, state, district, region, and national level. And my 3 sons and 6 grandchildren, plus their friends and other children, have been encouraged to protect and respect our environment through FFGC-sponsored youth activities. I promoted and volunteered for the Wacabe Youth Camp, which is a nature camp in the Wekiva Springs State Park. Save the Earth's environment through knowledge, shortened to and called SEEK, is an environmental program for high school youth held each summer. College and scholarships with students in FFGC-related fields, and also junior and high school garden clubs and flower shows. So FFGC is involved in all aspects, and I'm proud to say they are a leader in our nation. It was in Florida that the junior garden clubs were first started, and many of the things that we have been leaders in have been picked up on the national level.
I know that FFGC gives out the Paths of Sunshine Award for roadside beautification. Can you tell us about that program and how it recognizes native roadside wildflowers?
Yes, this was started back in 1985, and yearly they give awards for the best roadsides. There's a competition among the districts, and it prompts people to get more wildflowers planted along our roadsides.
And does it recognize it's native wildflower plantings, correct?
Yes, it's awarded by the districts where the entries come from throughout the state.
And that's the 7 Department of Transportation districts.
Yeah, these are the Department of Transportation districts, not the FFGC districts. Our state is divided into 12 districts for the garden club, and each district has a director that leads in that particular area.
Nancy, you've been involved in the native plant industry for a very long time. You, some might say you're a pioneer in this field. Tell us about the early years of the native plant movement in Florida and your involvement with the Florida Native Plant Society and Florida Association of Native Nurseries, and how that brought you to the Florida Wildflower Foundation.
Okay, well, when I was still in college, my botany professor suggested we go to the very first Florida Native Plant Society meeting, gathering at Rollins College. And so I was there. And shortly after that, I also started the Heartland chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. Okay, this was a while ago. And so I actually typed out those first newsletters on a manual typewriter, if any of you remember those days, and sent them out and made lots of phone calls. And we actually had a really good, strong showing at a local level too. I think I was even on the board at one time. Both my husband and I, from one year or another, spearheaded the annual conference for the Florida Native Plant Society, which was a huge effort. So I'm glad they have better ways of handling that now. About a year, 2 years maybe, after the Florida Native Plant Society began, my husband and I started our business, The Natives, and that was in 1982. So we've been doing it for 40 years now. And our goal was to grow native plants of Central Florida. And also, kind of a side goal, we were approached by the phosphate mining industry. They had a lot of problems getting plants established to live, like sand pines on reclaimed land. And so that was one of my first focal points, was to see if we could assist in the establishment and restoration of some of our natural communities. And I think also, I always tell people, I was sure I was going to be wetland. Well, the industry at that time, just beginning, was actually focused on growing wetland plants for required mitigation. And our focus really turned to the uplands. So over the years, we have worked on things like germinating wiregrass, one of the mainstays of our ecosystems. I think we grew some of the first seedlings in our nursery at the same time up in the Panhandle. Nature Conservancy did that too. But from there, we went into harvesting natural seed, reseeding, preparing the land, getting rid of the exotic species, often pasture grasses, and following that up with a lot of research, maintenance, etc. And it's a lifelong experience, and I think every single time we attempt a restoration, we learn something new. And I'm really happy to say here at this point too, that as Bill and I are retiring slowly, I think, my son and daughter are taking over the business beautifully. I always say they do a better job than we ever have. So we're glad to see that our efforts are continuing. Well, we do have a native nursery too. I think I kind of slid by that, but we've had a native nursery, which we still have. We did a lot of landscaping because my husband was a landscape architect. And our focus really now is often at upland restoration. So it's been a journey. Enjoyed every minute of it.
And was that, so you were in the beginning of the Native Plant Society, was that also when the Florida Association of Native Nurseries started? Were you involved in that?
Oh yeah. At one of the meetings, and I don't remember the year, but it was a few years after the Native Plant Society started, a number of us gathered during the annual conference. I remember George Gann and Richard Moyrud and Mike Jameson, for example, were there, and a few other owners of native nurseries. And at that point, we decided that we would start this association that would help each other grow, share information, and market native plants. And I think I've been a board member up until just a few years ago.
And tell us about your family's political interests as that related to wildflowers. How did your role as First Lady play a part in the establishment of roadside wildflowers here in Florida and the state wildflower license plate?
Politically, I don't know if it starts there, but when we came to Tallahassee, I met Gary Henry, and he was such an influence and such a big part of not only the license plate, but the Wildflower Foundation and Alliance. So we miss him. But my interest started, I think, with the North Carolina flowers and just the whole concept of putting wildflowers on the roadside, because I really think that it says something to tourists and other people about whether we care about them, and the whole idea of providing some beauty for every person. And I think that's every person's right almost to have something beautiful in their life, even if it's one wildflower or one flower. But after meeting Gary, he told me about Jeff Norsee's work in Monticello. And Jeff had planted 4 plots, well, probably 8 plots, because he put some Coreopsis, some black-eyed Susans, some blanket flower, and laurel sage. And he used the Florida ecotypes in one bed, and he compared them with the seeds that the state was buying outside of Florida. There weren't any seeds to speak of that would fill this gap. And Jeff compared the ones we bought outside the state to those that that he had found such a limited supply to compare. And there was a big comparison between how they thrived. So the friendship with Jeff and Gary was pivotal, I think, in the establishment of what would grow and how they would thrive, I guess is the word I want. I told you about the trip to Texas to see the wildflowers there and the part that Lady Bird Johnson played. When the license plate was proposed, I think it was proposed 2 or 3 times, and the gathering of signatures was, I think we had to have 10,000, 12,000 signatures to get the plate. A couple of times those failed. And then I don't know who all was interested, but I know that there was a man who came to our office, the Lieutenant Governor's office, and he brought gladiolas every year. And I showed him the petition, and he said, "Oh, I'll take those back home and get our Boy Scouts on it." So the Boy Scouts helped gather 10,000 signatures. And then the Department of Transportation participated in a big way in donating $30,000 toward the license plate. In the Senate, Toni Jennings was the president of the Senate, and she was a big part of getting that legislation passed. And Ben Watts was Secretary of Transportation. And if you look at the timeline on our history, the Department of Transportation was so important and so encouraging, and they made a huge difference. I don't want to leave out my husband because he was the most encouraging to me. He loves all things growing and beautiful. And he was pivotal in all this too, kind of behind the scenes and working to get this passed. And so many other people were doing that too. So I don't want to leave anybody out, but politically it was a good time to be in government. And there were good people there. You may have to edit that out.
Okay. Carolyn, I know you too were involved in helping to get that legislation passed. And can you tell us about your experience with that and with the Garden Club's involvement?
Yes, I worked with Gary Henry for many years on the Path of Sunshine, the roadside beautification program. And FFGC was the leader in getting the Coreopsis named the state wildflower and also the state tree. And they had tried for many years to get enough signatures. And it was when Gary Henry and others joined in getting those 10,000 signatures that it was finally passed. And thanks to all the people that participated. It was Bill 1909, and it was passed in early 1999. It listed the basic responsibilities of the Florida Advisory Council under the sponsorship of the nonprofit organization Keep Florida Beautiful. Gary invited me to serve on the Wildflower Advisory Council. The first meeting was held on September the 2nd in 1999 in Orlando at Lou Gardens. I was asked to serve as chairman, but I declined as I was installed on Earth Day, April the 22nd, 1999, as president of FFGC, which at that time was a 20,000 member organization, and it required a lot of my time. However, I did accept the position of treasurer, and I enjoyed that for 14 years on the Florida Wildflower Foundation Board. One of our very first duties was to design the plate. It went on sale in the spring of 2000, and it was presented at a garden party that Ann and I hosted at the FFGC headquarters in Winter Park.
Tell us a little bit more about the Wildflower Advisory Council. Who was involved with that, and what organizations were represented? I know some early FNPS folks were participants, like I think David Driley and Kathy Burke, but who all was involved in that organization?
Well, we had a representative from University of Florida. Terrell Nell was in there, and there was Allison DeFore and Walt Taylor were a part of that board, as I remember. Of course, Jeff Castor represented the Florida Department of Transportation and was such a wonderful force, and later became chair. Carolyn, you represented the garden clubs, I guess, was on that. What about Rocky Randall? He was the first chair, I think, of the Wildflower Alliance or advisory board. We were very much an advisory board, which was a little frustrating. We were under the wing of Keep Florida Beautiful because they had the 501c3 designation. So that was important to keep, and we worked with them for a few years and then became a foundation.
And what moved what was the reason that it moved from the Wildflower Advisory Council to the Florida Wildflower Foundation?
It was primarily a money question and a help me, Carolyn. I know it was
Okay, Ann.
I don't know how much of this you'd like to know.
Okay. Well, it was difficult to operate under an organization that was not tuned into our goals. And it was at that time that the committee of Gary Henry and Jeff Castor and Ann and myself established the Florida Wildflower Foundation as a 501c3 organization. And the state legislation approved moving the tag under the new foundation, which strictly operated under the guidelines and the rules that had been established as to what our goals were. Gary Henry served as a director following his retirement, and then Lisa Roberts assumed the position, and Lisa retired in 2021, and that's when Stacy Matrasa became the director. And I have been an active member of the Florida Wild Foundation, and I'm the only member still on the board from the original team. Mm-hmm. So I'm still dedicated.
You are indeed.
And tell us a little bit about the statute that requires, what we can do, what the foundation can do with those funds, and why they're specifically for research, education, and planting. Was that a creation when the council was formed? Is that something that the state dictated?
To my knowledge, that was part of the wording of the original legislation, that the funds would be used for those three purposes. And that was education, planting, and research. And it always had to be separated financially as to how much funds were going in each direction. We were allowed a 15% of our income to go for our management and overhead, but we normally came in only about 7 to 8% that went for overhead.
Well, Carolyn was a great force actually in keeping all our finances straight, because we had to have a certain percentage of each of those three categories. And the tag was a part of the project, but there were other areas that funds came in that had to be allocated into a different account. So it was a lot of work, and she did a marvelous job. At the beginning, and I hate to start down this track because I'm not sure I can name all the representatives, but the legislation, I think, had specific representatives from, like, the Department of Transportation, the Native Plants, I don't know if it's a Native Plant Society, but there were about 6 that we had a representative. The Department of Agriculture had a representative. I know Kathy Burke was an important part of that original group, and she helped us define what a wildflower in Florida, what that would encompass, what was there since 1513, and which ones were invasive and which ones weren't. She was quite a help in the scientific part of that. Brightman Logan was and is still a part of research and has made such a difference in our organization. We just had some very outstanding people that have worked to make this foundation into a, right now, $4 million enterprise. So all for the good.
Nancy, you've been involved with the foundation for quite a few years. What attracted you to the foundation, and what programs are you most excited about or involved in with us, with this organization?
Oh, yes. I have to credit Lisa Roberts. She certainly did her best to lure me in at frequent conferences, etc. But it was Brightman Logan who was and is the chairman of the research committee, and he really said that Florida Wildflower Foundation has money set aside special to explore research projects. And I think that might be the primary reason why I was lured in. And it's been an exciting adventure. We have done a number of different kinds of research over the years. And presently, our goal, in combination with the Florida Wild Foundation as a whole, is to look at corridors in urban areas, that urban wildflower wildlife connection to our natural areas. This is our largest focus right now, and we hope to see that expand in the years to come. We find if we're really going to save the essence of what Florida is naturally, we can't just have set aside areas for protection, but they really need to connect throughout the state. So I'm excited about that path going forward.
Anne, tell us about the creation of the Wildflowers Seed Growers Cooperative. What was behind the creation of that, and how is the foundation involved?
The seed growers, it turned out, were a very important part. Terry Zen is on our board and a former chair, and he has one of the most beautiful wildflower farms, and he collects the native seed, and that's a real issue for us with the Wildflower program, because you've got to have good seed, and our climate is so unique in Florida that the seeds we buy from Arizona and Texas are not Florida seeds, so they don't do as well as our ecotypes. I think the seed program itself started as an outgrowth of the legislation at the time to stop growing tobacco, to encourage the tobacco farmers to grow something other than tobacco. One of the areas was these Florida ecotypes, seed growers. And we had at the beginning, I think probably 10 or 12 farms that grew wildflower seed for Florida specifically. That number has gone down in the last few years, but Terry's farm I know is still at work, and several others. But it was mainly the tobacco legislation that established some of these seed farms.
And was the foundation part of that, or a part of helping to get the seed cooperative up and running?
I think it was part of the encouragement for it to be up and running. I don't know if they sponsored or if I don't think we sponsored the legislation. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, so here's a question for all three of you. Did being a woman in the early conservation movement affect your journey? Are your stories different or more meaningful because you are women? Nancy, do you want to take this one first?
In my experience, and of course it started a long time ago from young women starting out today, it's true that there weren't as many women in the general industry. I can even remember some fairly painful rides in trucks with men who just weren't used to this type of relationship. But I just was myself and carried on with the confidence that I had to be me. And as a result, I really didn't see that difference. I think as years have gone by in ecological gatherings, whether it's for research or in general audiences, I see more and more of women being involved, and especially in the research or management part of it. I'd say they're a good 50% plus now. We'd have to take a roll to find out. But to anybody who's starting out in that field and is a little bit intimidated, say be yourself and display your confidence.
Carolyn, same question to you.
Well, a lot of people look at the garden clubs as being little old ladies in tennis shoes. That is not true today. The first committee that the Florida Federation of Garden Clubs had way back in the almost 100 years ago was the billboards on the highways. They wanted highways to be visual beauties and not huge billboards distract. And they have been engaged throughout the years in our environment, planting, beautification of their cities, and just programs to teach the public. And it is so widespread of what they actually do cover. And it doesn't have to be women. The men are always welcome to join also, and we do have men that have joined and are a big asset, but it's the goals that we seek to make our earth a better place to live and to protect our environment. And this continues from generation to generation.
Yeah, same question. And I wonder too, if being in the political world as well, if you had any, if there were any obstacles based on your gender.
It's funny, I think it's a little bit of a reverse. I think wildflowers were seen when we were there, or maybe longer ago than that, as a feminine interest. And I know when we were running for office, I thought, I'd like to give out seed packets for wildflowers. They encouraged me to get on a more political issue than flowers. So the fact that there are men involved on our board and were pivotal in getting us started as a foundation, and as even an advisory board, I think those were good things, because the men that are involved with an issue like wildflowers is a plus. That's probably the opposite of what everyone else's experience is. But I think as long as we look at it from an environmental standpoint and from a conservation standpoint, being a woman in that arena is an important part of preserving and enhancing what Florida is, which is so important to keep it and natural and not totally a developed place.
So is there anything else you'd like us to know about your journeys, your life experiences as it relates to native plants and conservation? Is there anything that didn't fit into any of the other questions that you would like to share?
In 1995 and 1996, I served as the chairman of the Wakiva Youth Camp. This is sponsored by the Florida Federation of Garden Clubs. There are 6 weekly sessions of camp with 104 campers each week and 50 volunteers and staff members. The camp motto is Campers Today, Environmental Leaders Tomorrow. Although I spent 14 weeks at camp over 2 summers, I still enjoy volunteering a week or 2 each summer. And reflecting back on my youth as a 13-year-old at a 4-H camp where we lit candles. In 1995, I introduced the candle lighting ceremony on the final night of Camp Wekiva. And each group makes a commitment on what they will do for the Earth's environment. And they go back to their homes, their family, the neighbors, and their friends to encourage them to join forces to protect the Earth's environment. It is estimated that over 23,000 candles have been lit. So this little light of mine still shines. Actually, I believe it is not my light, but God's light shining through me.
Lovely, Caroline. Nancy, you want to add something?
Yeah, over the years, I've been involved in a number of environmental organizations. We've talked about Florida Native Plant Society, FAM, SER, Society for Ecological Restoration, and others not quite so hands-on, and the Florida Wildflower Foundation. And even though it sounds like we're just focused on wildflowers and it may have a smaller mission, I can honestly say that of all these organizations, I think the Florida Wildflower Foundation has accomplished a huge amount of actual things on the ground and education. So I really have enjoyed being on the board of this foundation, being a part of it.
You. And do you want to add anything?
I think one way that I'm excited about with the foundation is all that we've accomplished and such a wide group of people who've been involved. I think teaching other people the importance of natives. I'm kind of late to the party, but I think it's probably one of the best focuses that we could have. I'm encouraged with Florida's direction in moving toward conservation easements where we can save some of the land from development and keep it in its natural state. And I think the importance of good government, people with a real interest in Florida's environment and the importance of the stewardship of our planet, and a bit of beauty for everyone outside is a combination that's hard.
So we're here today to celebrate you all as pioneers of Florida's conservation movement. But we're also raising money in your honor to establish an internship program with FNPS for young people, for college students and young emerging professionals, excuse me, that will focus on, focus on research and education opportunities in native plant conservation. So my question to all of you, as women, as conservationists, and as activists, what advice or message do you have for young people who are interested in native plant conservation? And I don't know who wants to go first, but
all right, I'll go first.
Nancy, thank you.
I've been thinking about this and I divided it into two parts. The first is learn all you can about our world. And I'm not talking about on the internet or on TV or anywhere else, books, but get out and observe our real world and observe it over and over and over again. Learn what you can, how these ecosystems work, how the plants differ from one area to another, etc., where each niche is. And the other is to learn, but learn about yourself and your strengths and what you can do best to get ahead with your goals, and don't be worried about what you can't do. Just explore your strengths.
That's good.
That's great. Carolyn, Ann, do you have some advice for young people?
I think I'd like to say to get outside as much as you can with visit our state parks. They are probably the best in the country, have been the best in the country. I'm sure they still are. Look for a native nursery that's close to you. Get on your phone and look for native nurseries near me and explore what's there. As Nancy said, learn all you can about the flowers and plants that attract wildlife, attract birds, attract something other than your green lawn. I'd say also elect people that care about the environment, that really have a record of like 1,000 Friends of Florida and Conservation Florida, Audubon, any of those organizations. Learn what they do and how far their reach is, and even fund them if you can. Plant a butterfly garden or plant a pollinator pot if you're in an apartment. You can do a lot to make a little oasis where you live with your home, in your city parks. Get involved with the government of those areas, and you'll make a difference. I'm counting on you. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Carolyn?
Well, I'd like to start with the parents. The parents should take on the responsibility of teaching their children very, very young and get them outdoors to enjoy nature. Plant gardens with them. And the Florida Federation of Garden Clubs has a summer camp for 6 weeks. We actually take children from the 1st and 2nd grade all the way up through the 9th grade. And that is a wonderful experience for children to be away in an environment filled with nature, animals, the sounds of the forest, and also to learn so much. And when they start young, it will stay with them throughout their life. And also spend time outdoors, put away those cell phones and all those electronic devices and listen to the real world.
Thank you, Carolyn. I think we have some questions from the audience that if you ladies would like to take them.
For sure. We have the top voted comment question by Janice Spencer. How was Coreopsis selected as the Florida State Wildflower?
It was promoted by the Florida Federation of Garden Clubs, and they were the ones responsible for the state legislation to pass that. They have sponsored different avenues throughout their history. We will be celebrating 100 years in 2024. They were also supporters of the Sable Pond for our state tree. And they have supported many environmental projects throughout the years. And their very first thing they promoted when they started almost 100 years ago was fight billboards. Do away with all that pollution on our highways and just sit back and enjoy the beauty as you travel the highways.
Thank you. Okay, so it's sort of a question discussion that's kind of going heavy here. But Bonnie asked, big box stores have a chain of command. Who should we talk to in order to convince them to add more native plants to their selection?
Ooh.
Nancy, do you want to take this one?
There's no easy answer to that one. I think the best I can still recommend is that you find a local nursery that includes native plant species and work with the local nurseries. I'm not sure that it's an easy pathway to convince box stores unless growers can make a specific arrangement with a certain box store.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really hard place to crack.
I don't have any advice either. I said, I don't have any advice.
One more thing. My husband handed me a note. Box stores want cheap plants, and it isn't always cheap to grow these kinds of species for all different kinds of reasons. You know, we don't mass produce cultivars. They're often seed grown, you know, they're mixed. So it's not easy to meet that demand.
Yeah, I get this question a lot. You know, why isn't FNPS convincing the big box stores to use more natives? And, you know, with 3 staff members, it's sort of like, you know, banging your head against the wall. It's like, you know, we have lots of native nurseries that are working really, really hard to meet demand. And, you know, we're working hard to create demand and encouraging people to use native plants. So it might seem like the best place to hit people when they go to Home Depot to go buy some plants for their landscape for them to be native rather than non-native. But as 2, you know, relatively small organizations monetarily in the state of Florida, you know, compared to say the Florida Nursery Growers Association, it's, you know, we're just still pretty small.
And it is hard to beat those prices. I mean, they source huge amounts of plants from growers outside of the state, and it's just, you know, they're massive growing organizations. So I just think we need to support our native nurseries and give them more of our money, more of our support, and help them grow. No pun intended.
And also more nurseries in general, and work with them to see if they start supplying native plants.
And that's a good point. There are a lot of local nurseries that aren't specifically native, but if they understand the demand, then they can hopefully start adding more to their offerings too.
You know, I think too that we can add to our own yards or whatever area we've got available. You can add some native plants to an existing landscape. We have a lot of camellias and azaleas, but we've been adding some native things to that to attract more birds and wildlife. So we can encourage people to use more natives and explain why.
Yes.
Melissa Fernandez asks, will there be more events like the Wildflower field trip, which was a big hit?
I'm assuming she's talking about the visit to Terry's farm, which we had last month. We do that annually when the blooms are at their peak, but we are working to put more field trips out there and to expand our reach around the state so that we can, you know, attract people who live in the Panhandle or in South Florida, as well as here where most of us are here in Central Florida. But yes, we are trying to ramp that up and get people outside to see some wildflowers.
That's fantastic. And just, I know people are probably seeing the notification that the next session is starting, but we had kind of planned on this running a little long, so don't worry, you're not going to miss Sean. I've let him know he'll start when we get done. We have another question from Janice Spencer. How long has FWF been in existence, and where did it start?
We've been around for over 20 years. Where it started, I think maybe Carolyn and Ann can speak to that.
I wasn't clear on the question. Where did the advisory council start, or the foundation?
Yeah, the foundation, but maybe they're referring to the advisory council. Maybe they want to go.
Started under the Florida Wildflower Advisory Council, and I think it was about 2 years later we formed the Florida Wildflower Foundation as a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And then we requested the state legislation to move the program under the Florida Wildflower Foundation, and that was accomplished. And it's been a very successful 22 years.
Yeah.
She answered that. I said, I think she answered that.
Yeah, there's a lot of very appreciative comments. That it's been great to meet you guys. We do have another question from Melissa Fernandez. How do your life lessons developing the organization inform the next steps for the Florida Wildflower Foundation?
Well, we are committed by state legislation to use the wildflower license plate money for 3 different avenues: education, planting, and research. There's actually that part of the wildflower tag falls under the jurisdiction of the Florida Wildflower Foundation. The foundation itself is separate in their income from other avenues like donations. And that money is also used for the same purposes, but it has a little more range. And because we are a nonprofit, we can receive donations.
Thank you. And we have a final question. Who selects the plant species for roadside planting? Is that exclusively FDOT? How can we convert them to using Florida natives instead of the Texas phlox?
Yeah, good question. It's the FDOT does do the selection, and we have had a program in the past where we've supplied seed that was the Florida ecotypes. That is fading a bit as the growers. There have been fewer growers doing other than Terry Zinn. What about it?
I might add that all the funds do not go to the roadsides. We back plantings in public areas, the schools, and the cities, and special buildings, perhaps. But that is then a question Stacy could probably talk more about.
And I would say, yes, FDOT, when it comes to the planting on the roadsides, FDOT does determine the seeds that they use, and they do tend to rely on the non-native Coreopsis and phlox because of its almost guaranteed performance. We are certainly in FDOT's ear about using native species, and we are currently looking into the issue of native seed availability, which, as Anne mentioned, is part of the issue. But we're also working to identify existing roadside stands of native wildflowers. And when we identify those, we're working with DOT, with counties and other municipalities to, we're making recommendations on management that would, like reduced mowing and other things that will help allow those native populations to exist and thrive. So, the roadside program has 2 sides of it. There is a lot of the planting that you see, especially in the Panhandle and on the Turnpike, that's non-native, but there's a lot of opportunity to protect these existing native stands, and that's a big effort of ours too. And you said that was the last question, didn't you? Sorry about that. I want to thank each of you, Carolyn, Nancy, and Anne, for all the work that you have done throughout your lifetimes to promote conservation of our native plants and natural lands, and especially for the service and dedication that you've given to the Florida Wildflower Foundation. We've done a lot of great work, but we couldn't have done it without you. I also want to thank the Florida Native Plant Society for giving us this platform to celebrate these women and share their stories. We're really excited to be a part of this conference. I love this conference. I've been disappointed that it hasn't happened, and virtual is fun, but I can't wait till we get it back in person. This is such a great conference to bring together so many native plant enthusiasts and experts. And we've been a part of this conference for many years. And so I really couldn't think of a more appropriate place to honor Carolyn, Nancy, and Anne. And I do want to just encourage all of you watching to please make a donation today to honor these pioneering women and support this new internship program that FNPS will be starting soon. So thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. And, you know, I don't think I could thank you guys any more than that, so I'm not going to try. Just that I put the donation link in the chat, and, you know, we are really close. We were over $1,000. And so if everybody would just
keep it coming,
just a couple bucks, we could hit that match. So thank you, Stacy and Jeff. So
thanks.
all right. Thank you, ladies, for coming on. Really appreciate your time. I know it was a lot of, you know, prep, and so I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks.